welcome to World Talks. My name is Sasha Farbach. Now, recent developments at the NATO summit have highlighted the delicate balancing act between the U.S. and European allies over sanctions on Russia and the ongoing Ukraine conflict. Now, with differing approaches and mixed signals, understanding the true implications for transatlantic relations is more important than ever. Now, to help us analyze it all, we're now joined by Tomasz Włostowski, a managing partner at EU Strategies. Good to have you on TVP World.
Good to be back. Hello.
So, Tomasz, what's your first reaction? I mean, Rubio's softening tone, what does that indicate in terms of U.S. policy, and how does that impact U.S. and European relations?
Well, look, I think we are more or less where we have been for quite a while, which is the Europeans are really sort of pressuring the United States to increase the sanctions pressure. The Europeans, I think, have already achieved, most of what we can achieve together, considering we have the requirement for unanimity. So we've already fired away all the sort of sanctions weapons we have. And it's quite frankly, and it's always been the case, that the United States, given its role in the international finance and international sort of monetary exchanges, the US has the ultimate very strong weapons to bear down on Russia. So for quite a while, Europe's been waiting on the United States to come down hard. But President Trump is quite, clearly, for whatever reason, he's quite clearly not willing to do that. Back then, Senator Rubio was quite anti-Russian, and he was very hard on Russia. He was one of these Russia hawks. So there were high expectations that when he was appointed as the Secretary of State, that he would, sort of support a much stronger Russia, much stronger American pressure on Russia. But it's quite clear that President Trump doesn't want to do it. Mm-hmm. So we saw that there were some hopes, given what Rubio has been saying, behind the scenes. He's quite tough on Russia, but that's behind the scenes because his boss, President Trump, is still not there yet, right? And I think there were quite a lot of expectations, especially after sort of the Israeli-Iranian exchange, that President Trump sooner or later is going to come down hard on Russia. We're not there yet. But we're going to get there at some point, I think.
Okay. I want to come to that point where you just said that for Europeans, we've achieved everything we can with sanctions together, what we can at this point. So I'm just curious how that impacts this new 18 sanctions package that's being discussed right now on the European Union level. I mean, that's currently sort of semi-frozen again because of the holdup. So what about the sanctions package then? What do you make of it? I mean, is this just hot air then? I mean, if we're looking at it, it's 22 more banks. Proposal includes a transaction ban. Is this not something that could have been included earlier? What do you make of this new package and how effective it will be against Russia?
Well, it really depends on which of those measures come through. Adding more entities, banks and so on. It has some impact, of course, but there are really three top issues on that list in the 18 sanctions package that could actually put much more pressure on Russia. But again, they're related to energy, and that's related to the United States. And those three measures are bringing down the price cap, but that, at least for now, Europe considers that requires U.S. acquiescence. It's the LNG ban, which of course is also connected to the package that EU has already proposed. And there's a ban on importation into the European Union of refined products with Russian crude. And that's a massive, massive weapon. It's a massive measure if we adopted it, because essentially it would pretty much, take away a lot of the incentives that countries like Turkey or India have in buying Russian crude, because what they do is they process that crude into other products, and then they send them to Europe. If we ban them, there's no real reason for them to buy Russian crude. So those are the three measures that the EU could do. But because they're related to energy, and EU's always been trying to align itself on energy with the United States, we were waiting, I think, for the summit to see what happens there.
Mm-hmm. Let's jump back to Rubio in the United States. You said that U.S. acquiescence is key here. I mean, that will lead more on energy, as you said, reducing the price cap, et cetera. But what could be, let's just entertain devil's advocate here, on, let's say, the costs, the risks, and the benefits of holding off on any more sanctions against Russia? Do you think that's some kind of a bigger strategy that Trump and his team are playing at, or is there more risks and threats involved if we don't push stronger U.S. sanctions on all this?
Well, if we don't impose stronger sanctions, we know what's going to happen, and we've seen that happening for the last, over 3 years, which is the war continues. The Russians feel, they're acting with impunity. They don't feel threatened, so the war continues. It's quite clear, I think, that if Americans come down with sanctions, so there are two aspects to that. One is, of course, is the sort of economic, and again, the Russians are making most of their money on selling energy. So if we can cut that off, it really hits their budget, it really hits their ability to wage the war. But it also, I think, would send a powerful political signal because, everybody's observing what's happening in the United States. President Putin and his advisors are very well aware that President Trump, for whatever reason, he doesn't want to push the Russians. Mm-hmm. So I think, once the United States comes around, that also sends a signal to the Russians that, look, that honeymoon moment is over, and the situation is getting much more complicated because, again, the Americans can really turn the screws on Russian economy.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what we gleaned from the NATO summit, and we heard some statements there from Trump, how do you translate that into real policy? Do you think he's more in a direction, let's say, ready for more tougher sanctions? Is he getting to that point? Or, I mean, it's always hard to read him, but where do you see the messaging from the last few days?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely difficult, to try to predict what Trump's going to do. I mean, he's famously unpredictable. But look, I think there are three elements to the story. So the first one was, I think, and this has been successfully for now diffused in The Hague during the NATO summit, which was Trump's aversion or dislike or, hesitancy about Europe and about the European allies. So that was sort of the first element hindering Trump's, greater pressure on Russia. And I think we have that off the table, right? The summit was quite successful. Trump has said a lot of, unexpectedly nice things about Europe. So that's off the table. So now we're coming down to a situation where he still, wants to give Putin time, but he's also increasingly getting frustrated, and he's been sending signals that he's coming around to realize that it's really Russia and not Ukraine that is the problem in solving the war, and he really wants to solve the war. I mean, it's very clear he wants to solve the war. Mm-hmm. And then there's a third element, I think, in the story, and that's the one that's been lacking until now, which is, if he comes down hard on Russia, it's not going to be because the Europeans are asking him to do it. And it's not going to be because Zelensky is asking him to do it. He's going to do it when he feels that his interests, his personal interests as the President of the United States and the interests of the United States are at stake. And I think this loss of credibility that he's slowly suffering because Putin's basically playing him, at some point that's going to come to bear fruit, I think.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to jump back to the European sanctions package because right now, I mean, we have the European Council meeting today as well. I mean, this is going to be pushed, especially by the Germans as well. Merz said this at the summit in The Hague yesterday. He wants to push this through. He wants American support, but it's still stuck between Slovakia and Hungary. Now, at the same time, that has also shifted. I mean, I think just recently we've heard also from the Foreign Minister, Bonar of Slovakia, that he's actually ready to negotiate here. Szijjártó of Hungary said he's not. So does this mean that there's a split here? Will we get a yes on the sanctions package? How much of wheeling and dealing will be happening here between these two?
So look, on those three most important measures on the energy things, there were, two elements. One was sort of the desire to coordinate with the United States, and the other one was, the threat of veto from Hungary and Slovakia. And, they were also tied to the United States because, of course, when they see that the President of the United States behind them, it's much easier for them to veto. But, this is the 18th sanctions package. EU sanctions on Russia get extended every half a year, and every time this comes around, Hungary and Slovakia threaten to veto, but at the end of the day, we come around and resolve it. So I don't think if the veto is really sort of the major obstacle. The real question is, the price that Orban and Slovakia are going to extract from the Commission on some other issues. The Commission has, tens and tens of different files, legislative files, where the interests of all the member states are involved. So I'm pretty certain that if they really want to adopt the package, Hungary and Slovakia are not going to be the real obstacle in making that happen.
All right, so classically, where there's a will, there's a way. And of course, I think, as we said, the key will be in the United States and with President Trump ultimately with all this. So look, we'll close it there. Tomasz Włostowski, really appreciate your insights this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but much more coming up right here on TVP World, so don't go away.